Welcome to the second progress update webinar and panel discussion.
Algunos aspectos técnicos antes que empecemos.
Some logistics before we start.
Está siendo transmitido vía Zoom y Facebook y que cuenta además con
This will have simultaneous interpretation.
para que ustedes tengan acceso al idioma que prefieren escuchar.
So you can have access to your language. If you haven't done so, go to the lower part of the screen where it has do three things before we start. Choose your language to be English or Spanish. Do not change that channel during the entire web discussion. Silence original or mute original audio and only have the audio of the presenter or the interpreter to facilitate the interpretation process and eliminate the background noise. It is difficult to see everyone on camera because we have a lot of participants today. So please include your name, organization into the chat and your respective country. And as a third recommendation, if you have questions, please use the icon for questions and answers in the Zoom or in comments, please. I would like to introduce very briefly those that will be with us at the, we have 4 speakers from different parts, from America to from Mexico, who will be with us in moderating the panel. And the people that you see in the background in this slide are those that have made it possible to do this webinar and the development and different issues. I'm going to introduce briefly what we're going to be talking about today. 4 different sessions in this webinar. First, we're going to do an overview of the Midcontinent Shorebird Conservation Initiative. Why do we need it? Second step, we're going to give you an update on the status of development of the strategic framework. Third, something very fundamental of this webinar is the panel where we're going to have presentations from 4 different countries and Q&As. And finally, some final comments and a wrap up and how you can get in touch with us. Having said that, is a very important session of this webinar that we brought the panel as an activity to provide information to the partners in this Midcontinent initiative to better understand how these strategic frameworks at a hemisphere scale will help us launch projects at a local level. Without further ado, I would like to give the audience to Rob Clay, who will tell us about this initiative. And with this, Rob will be speaking in English. So please, everybody, do not change your interpretation channel. Only the interpreter will change channels.
Strategic framework focused on the Midcontinent. Hopefully, as many of you know, the interior of both North and South America are incredibly important for shorebirds, both for shorebirds that migrate entirely within the interior of the continent, just use interior habitats, and species were actually en route from breeding grounds to the coast. So we have an important area of both North and South America for shorebirds, which holds a number of habitats which are among some of the most threatened actually in the world. Grasslands, with very high rates of loss and degradation. Forest areas, which there might not be many shorebirds using. Forests, the loss of forest has an impact on many other ecosystems, and then some of the largest wetland ecosystems in the world, which are also suffering major changes. So there's a very significant need to focus on the conservation of shorebirds and their habitats within the interior of the continent. And what we're really looking to do is develop an overarching framework which identifies the priorities and can help guide decisions regarding conservation actions and outcomes within that geography. Next slide. And in effect, what we're trying to do is to fill the conservation gap. Over the past 5 years or so, there have been flyway scale shorebird conservation initiatives and frameworks developed for the Atlantic Flyway and for the Pacific Flyway. So we have a fairly significant gap in between those, and that's what we're now looking to fill. Next slide. Now, one of the advantages of being last, so to speak, in terms of developing a flyway scale conservation initiative is that we can learn from the others. The Pacific had the opportunity to learn from the Atlantic, and we now have the opportunity to learn from both the Atlantic and the Pacific. And one of the lessons learned is really the benefit of right from the start saying not only are we going to develop a strategic framework, but also an initiative to help guide and support the implementation of that strategic framework over time. The Atlantic in particular perhaps started more with a focus on developing a strategy and a plan, and it was only once they'd been developed that the decision was taken to sort of evolve into an initiative to oversee the implementation of the plan. So we have the advantage of being able to think through both at the same time and think about how development of a framework can feed into an initiative which can then support its implementation. What we're trying to really achieve through developing this strategic framework is partly placing local action within a flyway context. It's also looking to integrate efforts throughout the flyway, enhancing partner and stakeholder abilities to collaborate, and really looking to facilitate collaboration at the scales necessary to conserve migratory shorebirds and their habitats, but doing it in a way which really complements other large-scale planning efforts, such as national shorebird plans, regional plans, the multilateral environmental agreements, treaties, and other such mechanisms. Next slide. In terms of geography, within North America, the Midcontinent is focused on bird conservation regions, which to a lesser degree, administrative flyways, which I think have been developed more for waterfowl, but also used to a large extent by the shorebirds. So you can see on the map we have a large Arctic boreal region, the Great Plains, the Mississippi Valley and Great Lakes, and the western Gulf Coast. The Arctic boreal region is actually being developed through a slightly separate process that I'll mention later, but it's also linked to an update of the Atlantic Flyway business plan. And within South America, we're focused on the ecoregions and the habitats which are not influenced by the tide, and focusing in on those ecoregions that are well known to be of significance for shorebirds. So if you look on the map and you can see some gaps, ecoregions which aren't colored in, that's not to say that shorebirds don't occur there. It's just that based on the best knowledge we have available to date, there aren't habitats or sites of particular significance for shorebirds in terms of the conservation of populations and of species. So instead, we're focusing in on the northern, central, and southern Andes, the Orinoco Llanos and the Beni Savannas, the Amazonian Orinoco lowlands, the Gran Chaco and Pantanal, the Pampas, and the Patagonian steppe. Next slide. In terms of our conservation or the targets of the framework, the main targets are the conservation targets, the shorebird populations and the habitats they use within the midcontinent during the non-breeding, the breeding and seasons. But we're also building in various aspects of human well-being, whereby the conservation strategies are not only benefiting shorebirds and their habitats, but wherever possible, benefiting human communities as well. Next slide. And in defining our conservation targets at the species level, we've tried to select a suite of species that represent a good diversity of shorebird species, including species of high conservation concern, including species where there is a good feasibility of restoring their populations, and then looking for species which also capture the range of habitats and different scales of conservation effort, of geographies within the flyway, and which have good connections to other planning efforts. Next slide. I won't go through these in detail. If you can see the species names, but essentially we have three broad groupings. Species which are primarily resident or migratory within North America, species which are primarily resident or migratory within South America, and then the species which are migrating between North and South America, the true long-distance migrants. And what we hope to capture through these species is, representation of the full diversity of shorebird species and other species of conservation interest within the flyway. Next slide. In terms of how we're developing the framework, this is hopefully very familiar to many of you who've participated in these flyway planning processes. So it's building from existing plans and information. It's applying the open standards for the practice of conservation. The big challenge with this effort compared to the Atlantic and Pacific flyways is that we've had to switch to virtual workshops, to virtual processes, but that has the advantage of being much more inclusive. It's providing us with the opportunity to really open up the participation to many more people. Process, as you'll be hearing shortly, is well advanced, and the South America we're close to starting workshops within the next few months, and the aim is to have the framework completed by the end of this year as a draft. And I think this is when I now hand over to Kelly.
Hi, this is Kelly Stone. Rob, did you want to take a minute and explain about the Arctic Boreal process, how that's being developed?
Yes, happy to do that. So for the Arctic Boreal, as I mentioned briefly earlier, we're also working on an update of the Atlantic Flyway plan. It's now been 5 years since it was completed, so it's timely. And one part of the Atlantic geography, which wasn't covered in great depth in the initial planning exercise, was the Arctic boreal. So we're in the process of starting a combined Arctic boreal planning process for both the Atlantic update and the initial mid-continent planning process. And that's starting through a compilation of Western science knowledge of shorebirds within that geography. And then we're hoping that during the course of the year, that can be complemented by a process that takes into consideration traditional and local ecological knowledge, the knowledge of First Nations, essentially. Over to you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. This is Kelly Stone. I'm with the Fish and Wildlife Service in the Albuquerque office in New Mexico. And I'm going to be talking today, I'm going to give you an update on the work we've gotten done in these three regions, the Great Plains, Mississippi Valley, and Western Gulf Coast. Next slide. So I'm the coordinator of the North American Committee. I'm working well with Brad Andres. He's providing oversight and technical advice and input. We've got 11 people on our committee, and they're from the three regions that you can see on the map. We've tried to space them out throughout the regions to make sure that the regions are well covered. These people have done a lot of work with us and will continue to do a lot of work. They help select workshop participants. We tried to pick a variety of people, not only shorebird experts, but habitat managers, policymakers. They've also provided a lot of technical input, and they're going to help us develop the draft American portion of the framework. Next slide. So as she's changing slides, in the last year, most of our effort has been to design and host 4 virtual workshops in order to get input from all of our partners to develop the framework. So we've really tried to use a really interactive venue online, and we had a workshop website, which you can see there. This is where we kept a lot of resources and information for participants. We worked in small groups with facilitators. Those small groups, we spoke in English and in Spanish, thanks to the facilitators. We had 6 facilitators. Jenny Duberstein was our lead facilitator. She worked with Foundations of Success and did a really good job on designing a virtual open standards workshop. It wasn't easy to do it online. We had a lot more people we were able to invite, but at the same time, it's difficult to get input, but I think she did a really good job on getting this done for us and with us. It did take a lot of effort. Next slide. So this is just a timeline of what we've accomplished. I'll explain in detail in a minute more about the workshops, but our first step was the North Committee developed what's called a draft situation model, which I'll explain what that is in a minute. And then our first workshop was in October. We had 104 people from all of the regions you saw on the map, all the way from Canada to Mexico. And then after that workshop, we had a workshop per region. And those workshops went from November of January 2021. And in those regional workshops, we developed conservation strategies and theories of change that were specific to that region. Next slide. So what you see on the screen, don't be concerned that you can't see the text. What this is this is a situation model. And basically it's just a diagram or a picture of an assessment of the most important factors facing shorebirds and habitats. So what we did with our partners, with 104 partners, we got those people together and we, next slide. So what we did with our partners is we identified 17 major threats, and they're in that kind of pink colored box there. So 17 major threats, we decided as a large group, those are the threats that were impacting our conservation targets, which are in green or in shorebird or shorebirds. Not only did we identify the threats, but the factors that contribute to those threats. And in addition to the conservation targets, we were able to identify, you can see in the blue boxes, ecosystem services and human well-being elements. And those are things that will benefit when we provide good shorebird habitat. So in other words, we're not only benefiting shorebirds by some of our conservation actions, we're providing ecosystem services like recreation opportunities, flood abatement, and other examples. Next slide. After the first workshop, when we developed our situation model, next slide, then we had regional workshops. And in those regional workshops, there were about 30 to 50 people in each of those 3 workshops. We started identifying our conservation actions or strategies. Those were the conservation actions we thought would minimize or address those 17 major threats. And then we ranked those strategies using this rating tool that you see on the right side of your screen. And then after that, we built results chains. And what a result chain is, sometimes people call it a theory of change. It's our theory on how things will change if we do a certain action or strategy. Next slide. So this is an example of just one result chain that we have produced in the workshops. We've produced about 17, and we will be refining them. So this is just an example, just to kind of show you how these results chains flow and what they are. So the actions are in yellow. Those are the things that we would like to do in order to address a threat. And then we also address the blue boxes are the things we think will happen once we enact those yellow boxes. And notice that we've identified objectives. So that will allow us to measure our success and if we need to adapt and change. Next slide. So in our workshops, we have basically come up with a situation model, an assessment of what we think is facing shorebirds, major threats, conservation actions, and also mapped out what we need to do in order to make those actions happen. So now what we're going to do next, in the next 2 months, is we will ask workshop participants to help us finalize workshop products. We'll ask them to review. And then starting in April, the North Committee, we will start taking those products and developing the framework or the conservation plan. So we will start writing our draft conservation plan in April and June. Once it's finalized, we'll ask our partners to review that. And then come August, we'll start working with South America to merge our portion of the plan with their portion of the plan. And also what you can see down below is the Arctic Boreal region. Those folks, they're currently working and they suspect or expect to be finished right around June or July. So all 3 groups will pretty much be coming together next fall and developing one conservation action plan, which we hope to have a draft come December 2021. So I want, that's my section. Next, I just want to thank everyone on the North Committee who has put all this work together, as well as our facilitators and Brad Andres. So next, I pass it over to Isadora.
Bueno.
Okay. She will be speaking in Spanish. I would like to thank Kelly for what she presented us, and also trying to be very inclusive, and because this is an initiative that covers a region with different languages, that we should have the interpretation in Spanish and in English, and also that is why we also prepared these slides in both languages. So I am the coordinator for the South American part, and in our process, we are just starting. Our process has been adapted from the process designed by North America. We adapted it for our reality in Latin America, and we have 7 phases, and we have implemented these 2 between November, December this year. And of what we have done is have a team. We will have many participants and experts in the region participating, being part of the workshops, and of bringing information. So we need a facilitating team with all the skills, and with a certain number of facilitators to carry out the task. These facilitators are being trained with standards for conservation. We are also gathering information on the conservation objects and identifying those actors that will be part of the following phases of this strategic planning effort. Here we have the other 4 phases where we will do the work in South America from February, December 21. And in the initial planning phase, this is a small group of experts. They will prepare what we call the first version of identifying key attributes and indicators for conservation targets that have been selected. We're going to identify and analyze the threats and generate the first version of strategies, and then later in the extended regional process, where we're going to invite experts from all the region, and experts not only with knowledge of migratory birds, but also people that know about the threats, the places, and other sectors, to socialize what we have found in the phase between and the results, to socialize and have feedback from those experts in those regional workshops. And finally, between November, December, we want to analyze the products for the South American region. And by having a similar process to the one in North America, the products will be merged in one strategic plan for the entire hemisphere, like Kelly said, and that we hope to finish by December 2021. All this that you have seen so far has been possible, or it would not have been possible without the support of the institution that you see at the bottom side, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Research, and different groups and different programs in that service, the help of Canada and the International Program for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But also, it is possible thanks to the contribution and the knowledge and the commitment of many people in South America. They represent different parts of the government and the non-governmental communities that there are too many to mention here. And with this, we finish the updating of both regions, North and South America. And I would like to give the mic now to Salvador and Carlos, who will be moderating the discussion panel. They will continue speaking in Spanish, so please stay on your respective language channel. Thank you, Isa. Good afternoon, all the attendees and the speakers. My name is Salvador. and I work for ProNatura Noreste. We are in the city of Monterrey, Mexico, and well, I've been participating also with this initiative in the western part of the Gulf. I will be a moderator in this next section with my friend Carlos Barriga. Carlos, please. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carlos. On this occasion, I'm also helping support this initiative. I work in ProNatura Noreste, and I will be reading the instructions. Please, we're gonna have the panelists starting now. You can write your questions in the Q&A sections in the lower bar or through the comments on Facebook, and we request that send your questions specifically in relationships to the different initiatives and not so much on the specific details of the project. Also, as a request, if you can write the name, for whom is this question, and for the question, logistics for the speakers, yes. For the panelists, we would like to remind you that you have 5 minutes for your presentation. We would like to ask you to please don't go too fast and enunciate and get close to the microphone. And the first panelist will be Ashley. She will be speaking in English. So please, everyone, stay in your language channel, and only the interpreter will change. Ashley, can you please start with your presentation? Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Ashley Dare. I'm a professor at Virginia Tech, and I am happy to have the opportunity to talk with you here today. I'm a social scientist, and I've been doing work related to human and shorebird coexistence for about 8 years in collaboration with the Atlantic Flyway for just 5 years. Today, I'm going to talk about how our social science research has been spurred by the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird Initiatives plan, which was published in 2015. And I understand that the work that I'm talking about related in most cases to coastal beaches is different than the situation in a lot of the Midcontinent, but I hope you'll see how the initiative and the plan itself has helped launch our conservation science, and in my case, specifically conservation social science. So the plan lists human disturbance as one of the 5 primary threats to shorebirds in the Atlantic Flyway, and it calls for the need to reduce that human disturbance by 90% on all of the managed sites. And the first action in that plan is to develop a best management practices document for shorebirds generally in the Flyway. And that's the project that we got started on. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funded us. We'll say next, so you can bring up my first graphic here. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funded us to put together a best management practices document for migratory shorebirds in the northeastern U.S. And we brought together managers and biologists, and we developed a consensus definition for disturbance and laid out what the top human activities were. We then combed the literature in order to have insights related to those activities. From there, we, along with our partners that you can see listed on the bottom of the screen, gained funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we built out our literature review on all aspects of the life cycle, not just migration. And then we began doing social science research on the ground, and we focused on a particularly problematic human disturbance activity, which is unleashed dogs, primarily in the US, with people who would walk their dogs on the beach and not put their dogs on leash. We surveyed over 1,000 people who were visiting coastal beaches in 3 states of the US, and then developed recommendations for how to encourage people to keep their dogs on leash when they bring their dogs to the beach. Now, since then, or I guess following that, I'd also say we did a flyway, North American component flyway wide survey of land managers in the US and Canada, looking at to what extent they were managing for human disturbance of all types, and also to what extent they were monitoring for human disturbance, and then what sort of needs they have from the flyway to continue to support them. We now have 3 more publications in the works, a report on continued work that we've done to survey beach walkers about another activity, walking themselves as people through flocks of migratory shorebirds. We've also have a report on some interviews that we've done with land managers about their experiences developing regulations to limit human disturbance, particularly regulations related to dogs on beaches. And then we have a new strategies document based on the social science that I'm talking about here, as well as complementary biological science from our colleagues at the Virginia Tech Shorebird program. And then also the experiences of shorebird conservation professionals who participated in a 4-part virtual workshop we hosted in December. Okay, next slide. So as you can see, we've developed a pretty extensive program of conservation social science focused on human disturbance. And AFC, as we call the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird Initiative, has played a really large role in this. Click, you can hit this slide there. The first thing is they've been helping to make sure that there's funding available for this work. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation put together priorities for shorebirds and provides funding for folks to work on shorebird projects. And they've very much based that on the priorities in the AFC plan. Next. Then additionally, there's a committee for the human activities component of AFC's work. And those have been great collaborators for us on grants. It's also been a forum to work together on all of these activities, and also to make sure that the science is helping inform the work of practitioners on the ground. Next. And then they've also been great communication support. AFC has a part-time U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employee, Deb Reynolds, who manages a really attractive and useful and up-to-date website. We have a component of that website just for human disturbance that you see on the left side of the screen here, and you can use the link that I provided if you're interested in seeing what we have there. And then she also provides communications through an email list. She promotes our webinars. She's developed a universal interpretive sign for coastal beach areas based on this research. And then she does graphic design for our reports. And then finally, AFC has just been a great place for research engagement. They help review our social science surveys to make sure they're relevant to the conservation issues, but also will make sense to the people taking them. They review our reports. And then they also have been a planning team to help us with the workshops that we've been doing to discuss the results and the application of our research. So I hope you can see how AFC and the conservation plan can lead to a whole body of applied conservation science and then products for conservation professionals by just one researcher and their team. And there's many other examples of people like me out there who've been able to do similar work thanks to the support of AFC and this conservation plan. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juliana Almeida. I lead the Shorebird Conservation Program for SABI Brazil. And I'm going to speak to you all today about how the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird Initiative, AFC, has contributed to the implementation of the Brazilian National Action Plan, which is a federal government instrument that allows us to strategize the conservation of threatened species throughout the country. They have national action plans for almost 75% of the 1,200 threatened species of animals in Brazil. In the case of the National Plan for Shorebird Conservation, it is led by the Federal Conservation Agency, ICMBio, through their Center for Bird Conservation, which is CEMAVI, the two logos there. As the other national action plans, it has a 5-year cycle. The first cycle was developed, was implemented between 2013 and 2018 next. And we are currently in the second cycle of the plan, which is really building on the first one, and it has the main objective to expand what we've achieved in the first cycle, and especially engage different stakeholders, especially the productive sector and the policy makers in the states, and with the conservation stakeholders. And to achieve that main objective, there are 4 specific objectives that are connected to disseminating and making all these stakeholders aware of where are the strategic areas for shorebird conservation in the country, more specifically along the 8,000 kilometer shoreline we have, to address human disturbance along those areas, and the awareness of the environmental licensing process, so that shorebird needs are taken into account during the process, and also to decrease our knowledge gap on shorebirds and their habitat use. At the bottom, I provide the link to the Shorebird Conservation Plan, the Plan Aves Vinícolas, if you're interested in taking a look. Next slide. So we started working and implementing the National Action Plan in 2013. The Atlantic Flyway initiative started interacting, or became more active in general along the hemisphere with us around 2015. And from then on, we've been able to build many collaborations. This has allowed for us to implement and increase the knowledge in many areas. Some of the collaborations and work that were very important relate to monitoring shorebird in our strategic areas. So we've been able, through collaborations with, in this case, Manomet, implement the International Shorebird Survey as a protocol for standardized counting of surveys for shorebirds along the country. There's also been many collaborations with CEMAVI and North American institutions for new aerial coastal surveys. And in 2019, we participated in a simultaneous coastal survey of the Southern Cone. It was the first time that Brazil was part of this coastal survey, and it was very well accepted, very well embraced by the Brazilians in general. Another very important collaboration that came from the existence of AFSI and our interaction between, the National Action Plan and AFSI, was the ability to collaborate and in the development of the National Action Plan second cycle. Through this collaboration, we were able to pretty much double the number of stakeholders that were invited to the workshop that built the second cycle, the strategy and the actions that we are going to implement throughout the second cycle. And it was a collaboration that included the Brazilian and US federal governments, American NGOs, and Brazilian NGOs. And as I said, capacity building was another key component or key bonus of this interaction of the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird initiative with the National Action Plan. We've been able to build capacity in shorebird management and survey techniques, and also with human disturbance. The example I give here is a small local initiative that has already started to implement a webinar. What they learned in the webinars we gave last year, and they have a beautiful campaign on Instagram and locally to protect shorebirds on the coast and a very popular beach, and in a very friendly and engaging manner. I'll pass on to the next panelist.
Okay, so we will stay here in the Atlantic, and I'm Brad Andrus with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the National Coordinator of the U.S. Shorebird Conservation Partnership and have been involved in the development of both the Atlantic and the Pacific Shorebird Flyway plans/strategies. What I'd like to talk to you this afternoon about is a component, again, of the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird Initiative, and that is shorebird harvest in the Caribbean and Northern South America. And I'd like to take just a minute here to give you the context of why this came out as one of the critical threats in the development of the Atlantic Plan. To give you an idea, shorebird hunting's been practiced since the mid-1600s by European colonists throughout the region. One aspect of this issue that makes it quite challenging is that there's really quite a wide range of regulation and restrictions on hunting among the countries and jurisdictions within this region. One kind of aspect too of the shorebird hunting is that virtually all harvested shorebirds are consumed, and that occurs in a number of ways. They can be sold in markets, used by individuals and their families, or sold to neighbors. And also there's a social component of hunting clubs, particularly on Barbados, where folks gather, and they tend to be men, for an afternoon of shooting, and then basically, fix the shot birds for the evening dinner. As I'm implying here, these birds can be harvested by shotguns primarily, or other types of firearms actually. And then on the coast of South America with a method that's known as a shocking wire, and occasionally even nets are used, mist nets to capture birds. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, this is, as with the disturbance issue Ashley talked about, one of the major threats that we thought were affecting shorebirds along the Atlantic America's Flyway. And so the thing that we did then, and kind of was really at the same time of the development of the strategy, which was before this publication in 2015, as we had established a working group to start thinking about how to address this issue. And again, that was something that Ashley brought out there in the U.S., and I guess you could even think about the the group in Brazil that developed the national plan as sort of a working group to really push these higher level ideas down to the ground. And I think, you know, as the framework really sets the stage, there's I think a real need then to have these groups dig into the details a little more so we can get real actions on the ground. And so through this group, then we took the kind of the start that was in the Flyway plan and developed our own plan to address the sustainability of shorebird harvest in the Flyway. And one of the key actions that we recognized or identified right away was to really determine if the harvest was limiting populations. So that assessment component has been a major action. As we got started with this, as I said, it really was around the same time we started thinking about developing the Flyway plan. We were able then to produce with the working group a report in 2017 on how the progress was going on tackling the actions we identified. And you can see we just kind of used a qualitative scale to track that success. And then from that, we revised then our action plan for the next 5 years, starting really last year. And one of the keys of that was to really evaluate the risk to success. Both the Atlantic and Pacific strategies have a section on what we thought were the main risks for us to actually implement the actions we identified. And so that was a thing that we revisited to try to see, you know, what could be holding us back in these various jurisdictions. And so these areas that are circled in red here, the islands and then the mainland part of Northern South America, are where we have projects going on now. And again, we as the working group think that these are the major areas where shorebird harvest could be an issue. Next slide, please. One piece of this too, yeah, you can just go ahead and put those down. I thought I pulled all the animation out. Sort of what was key in moving forward on the shorebird harvest issue was the involvement of the French government. There's a number of overseas departments and territories in the Caribbean and Northern South America, including Guadeloupe, Martinique, and French Guiana. And there is a lot of harvest there. For the French, hunting is a constitutional right, so it's a very different situation than what we were used to dealing with in the US and Canada. And so one thing that kind of grew again out of having this large Flyway scale framework is we developed a memorandum of understanding between the hunting agencies of France, Canada, and the US to cooperatively work on this issue. And what that has been able or has enabled us to do is really to give each other support for changes to laws and policies. For example, the U.S. Shorebird Conservation Partnership weighed in on getting a license requirement for hunters in French Guiana when there was a political chance that that could be changed. And from what our colleagues say, it's letters like this from the group, and the Canadians sent one as well, just showing the support for our French colleagues and the importance of trying to tackle this harvest issue. And in French Guiana, that was beyond just shorebirds. Kind of what grew out of that is this document here, and there's now an examination for you to get a license as a hunter in French Guiana. And again, because of our collaboration, I was able to help them use the documents we had in the U.S. on a hunter education to model their own program. And then also kind of working together to develop outreach tools like these shorebird species that are huntable in the bottom, and then also to do analysis of surveys of hunters and their harvest levels. Next, please. And so probably, you know, another important thing here I have at the bottom is this idea of leveraging funding. So next slide. And again, we were able to use this collaboration and this broad scale framework to use Canadian money to leverage National Fish and Wildlife Foundation funds that then could go to the French Hunting Agency to help implement projects in the Caribbean islands primarily, and also French Guiana, and kind of using all these different sources that you may not have really thought about for the Western Hemisphere, and particularly the Atlantic Flyway, these European sources to help, you know, leverage our within hemisphere dollars for the conservation of shorebirds and indeed for other species. And so that's one way too, then we've been able to really stretch out the match money across the whole hemisphere, or at least for the hunting issue where it's hard to make match in the Caribbean, for example. So with that, I guess Gustavo, you're next.
And good afternoon from Ensenada in Baja California, Northwest Mexico. My name is Gustavo Daneman, and I am the director of a civil nonprofit organization called Pro Natura Noroeste. I am also in charge of its bird conservation program, which operates in the northern Mexican portion of the Pacific Flyway. The University of Baja California Sur and Pro Natura Noroeste have been studying shorebirds in the Guerrero Negro wetland complex since 1998. The complex, which is located in the central portion of the Pacific coast of Baja California, covers about 100,000 hectares of natural and artificial wetlands. About 2/3 of that area are covered by the Ojo de Liebre and the Guerrero Negro coastal lagoons, and 1/3 by the largest saltworks in Mexico. During the winter, it hosts almost 70% of the entire world population of the Pacific red knot, 69% of the short-billed dowitcher, 54% of the marble gullwit, and 30% of the snowy plover, for an average of 220,000 shorebirds each year in the last 14 years. This makes the Guerrero Negro wetlands the most important winter site for shorebirds in Mexico. Our banding and monitoring research has allowed us to connect the red knot winter population from Guerrero Negro with those in the upper Gulf of California, the Northwest USA and Canada, Western Alaska, Wrangler Island in the Russian Chukchi Sea, and Padre Island in Texas. Other relevant research topics focus not only on the red knots, but on other shorebird species wintering in this site, include population dynamics, migration, feeding ecology, habitat management, education, and professional training. Guerrero Negro will also host several stations of the MOTUS network that we are deploying in Northwest Mexico to monitor birds at a regional scale, together with a number of nodes that will allow to determine local movements of individual birds in the area. All this work in Guerrero Negro and Northwest Mexico has been funded for years by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Packard Foundation. Next slide, please. Can you change the slide, please? Thanks. The Pacific Americas Shorebird Conservation Strategy has provided a framework to organize our shorebird conservation work both locally in Guerrero Negro and regionally in Northwest Mexico. It also facilitates collaboration and the exchange of information and experience with other practitioners following the strategy along the Pacific Flyway. And let me give you some examples on that. In regard of the creation of conservation initiatives with industries, our work would be almost impossible without the logistic support from Exportadora de Sal, the company that owns the sal works in Guerrero Negro. We will partner with this company to install some of the motor stations in the sal works and also to maintain the ecological conditions of evaporation ponds that provide habitat for more than 20,000 shorebirds. To promote conservation constituencies in Guerrero Negro, we have a close partnership with the Vizcaíno Biosphere Reserve, which recently adopted the Pacific America's shorebird conservation strategy. We have also maintained education programs focused on school children and their families and training programs with local tourist companies, all of them long-term supporters of shorebird conservation. Even with very limited resources, the coastal lagoons in Guerrero Negro are regularly patrolled by the Biosphere Reserve Authority, while the Saltworks Company restricts and supervises the access to all the concession area. This prevents disturbance to shorebird habitat almost completely in this site. In regard of public policy, this site has been designated as a federal biosphere reserve, as a Ramsar site, and as a shorebird reserve of hemispheric importance between other national and international recognitions. In particular, the Biosphere Reserve has management and public use plans, which include diverse considerations regarding the protection of shorebirds and their habitat. All the features I have just mentioned make the Guerrero Negro Wetland Complex an ideal site for long-term research, as that conducted by the Bird Lab of the University of Baja California Sur and ProNatura Noroeste for the past 20+ years. The possibility to sustain efforts in research had made shorebird in Guerrero Negro one of the best studied bird communities in Mexico. But in any case, it's fair to say that we are just beginning. Our investment in the training of professional researchers, park rangers, and other local partners will surely facilitate the continuation of further research and conservation actions in this priority site. So we go back now to Carlos and Salvador to continue with the panel, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Gustavo, and all the panelists. Arturo, I'm going to continue in Spanish. Muchas gracias. Bueno, antes de pasar a la siguiente sección.
To the next sessions of Q's and A's, I would like to remind everyone that you can send us your questions in the Q&A sections that is in the lower part of your page. Likewise, you can write to us in Facebook, or to remind you that your questions, try to make them focus on the different projects that the different speakers have shared, and how does your question relate to the migratory routes regarding conservation. For the next section, there won't be any translation at all, and that will be deactivated, and Carlos and I will be translating everything else. Bye-bye.
So maybe if we could take that Salvador or Carlos, that first question to Ashley.
So, Brad, can you help us?
Yeah, it's a little bit long, but I think the gist here is really working with cattle ranchers in a framework to really to work on conservation on their lands and to not get them to convert to agriculture and to be thinking about other species.
Okay, I'm gonna introduce that question, so please wait for me, Ashley. Mencionan que, o la pregunta en general es, ¿de qué manera o bajo qué marco se puede realizar o generar que los ranchos ganaderos, en vez de que sean convertidos a agricultura, se mantengan como ranchos ganaderos y pueda favorecer la conservación de especies de aves playeras?
Thanks for this question. While I don't work on shorebird issues in the Midcontinent region, I do actually work with private landowners and have done work in the grasslands of the United States as well as the Intermountain West region. So
Sorry,
I'll draw
Ashley,
on that.
I want to do this.
Your microphone, Carlos, excuse me.
Dice que no trabaja con aves playeras en las zonas continentales.
So a couple of thoughts. One is from my experience working with ranchers in the west of the United States, they typically want to stay in ranching as well. There's a lot of research that talks about the lifestyle centrality of ranching, and for many ranchers, they very much want to be able to continue ranching.
En su caso, trabajando con ganaderos, se ha dado cuenta que muchos de ellos quieren seguir trabajando bajo esos esquemas porque les conviene y además pues favorece la conservación.
So the conservation professionals and organizations I've worked with in the West have tried to learn more about how they can support ranchers who want to stay in ranching, but who are struggling to do so because of the finances of it or because their children are not interested in continuing ranching after they themselves become too old to ranch.
Los conservacionistas que han tratado de estudiar el por qué en algunos casos algunos ganaderos ya no pueden continuar o ya sea que sus hijos no continúen con la misma actividad, entonces han buscado la manera de apoyarlos tanto financiera como en cuestión de capacidades para que esto continúe.
Another important thing that they've realized is that, at least in the United States, ranching gets a bad reputation. And so people often think that ranching is all bad when there are many ranchers who are trying to do it sustainably. So the conservation community has also been working on trying to get out messaging that ranching can be valuable for not only food, but also for wildlife as well.
Sí, que han tratado de incentivar esta cuestión de la ganadería para continuar con la conservación.
And so I'd say just a couple of big things besides those insights is one, I think that there is literature out there that could be useful to this group to understand more about the ranching community. There are social scientists working with them.
Sí, que existe cierta información que pudiera ayudar a esta ruta migratoria o a esta iniciativa para poder ver más allá qué es lo que está pasando en estas zonas que se están convirtiendo a agricultura o que pueden convertirse.
And then second and finally, I do know that there are some initiatives beyond shorebirds that are working to try to find sustainable grasslands and human communities. One is the Central Grasslands Roadmap 2020 project. I was not involved in it, but some of the folks on the line here today are.
Y por último dice que existen algunas iniciativas que ayudan o permiten esta cuestión, que de hecho la está compartiendo en el chat y ustedes lo pueden ver ahí. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
So we have another question. Tenemos otra pregunta for from Jesus Franco. to Kelly and Isadora, de Jesús Franco para Kelly o Isadora. Y la pregunta, the question says that how is social science, human disturbance, being incorporated into the very unique and complex social and economic situation of Latin American countries in the initiative? La pregunta dice que cómo las ciencias sociales, esta cuestión de las perturbaciones humanas, han sido incorporadas dentro de la situación compleja, social y económica de Latinoamérica o de los países de Latinoamérica en esta iniciativa.
Yeah, thank you, Jesus. I think Isadora and I will answer that really good question. We're going to answer it on a PDF document that we'll share with the rest of you later. But let's move on to a question for one of the other panelists, either Gustavo, Brad, or Juliana.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So I'm going to ask Gustavo. Voy a preguntarle a Gustavo. Por parte de Daniel Cárdenas, pregunta cómo es el involucramiento de las comunidades locales con el proyecto y si se tiene alguna capacitación para ello. So Daniel Cárdenas is asking that how is the way the community could be involved in this project or in this initiative, well, in the project from Gustavo, and if there is some capacitation for them.
Sí, las comunidades suelen relacionarse con los proyectos de conservación, en este caso de aves playeras, a diferentes niveles. Desde los sectores que están interesados o vinculados con el área de trabajo por alguna situación o actividad económica, hasta las comunidades que simplemente, o los habitantes que simplemente se encuentran habitando en las zonas adyacentes a los sitios de trabajo. En el caso del ejemplo que yo comenté en Guerrero Negro, la participación directa de empresas de servicios turísticos que trabajan, por ejemplo, con la observación de la ballena gris o con la observación de las aves en la región como actividad turística, han estado muy interesados en obtener capacitación sobre el tema, desde cursos de aviturismo hasta cursos básicos de ornitología de campo y conservación, para entender y poder a su vez explicar y valorar eso ante los turistas. Empresas como Exportadora de Sal, que es la propietaria de las salinas en las que se encuentran las aves playeras aquí en Guerrero Negro, han estado siempre muy interesados en conservar la avifauna del lugar como parte del manejo que hacen de las zonas de evaporación que forman parte de los procesos de producción de sal. Eso es parte también del compromiso que la empresa tiene con la conservación del área desde hace muchos años. Y en el caso de los habitantes del lugar, han participado a través de la capacitación que nosotros hacemos con maestros de escuelas y con promotores comunitarios, a través de los cuales la información acerca de las aves playeras y sus hábitats llegan a los niños y a través de los niños a sus familias. También hemos organizado festivales de aves en los cuales se promueve todo el conocimiento de las aves playeras y su conservación. Y capacitación también para el personal del área protegida de la reserva en aspectos básicos de monitoreo, de técnicas de estudio y de conservación de aves playeras para fortalecer esos temas en el sector de gobierno que está a cargo del área. Entonces, siempre se hace a multinivel y aprovechando los intereses, las necesidades de los actores relacionados a un sitio en particular.
¿Puedes repetir tu respuesta en inglés, Gustavo, por favor?
Sí. The involvement of the local communities in the sites that we work with shorebird conservation happens at different levels, from those actors or stakeholders that are involved in the area for some kind of economic activity to those that just live in the closeness of the wetlands where we work. In the case that I just exposed in Guerrero Negro, we have been working very closely with tourist companies that provide whale watching services and bird watching services to tourists that have been always interested in being trained on bird watching techniques and basic ornithology and conservation topics to be able to explain that and increase the value of the experience of the tourists in the area. Another very important economic stakeholder for our work in Guerrero Negro has been Exportadora de Sal, which is the company that owns the sal works in the Guerrero Negro region, that have been always interested and ready to invest in the conservation of the birds that use the sal works and the ecological conditions of the evaporation ponds in the area, which are critical for the production of salt in the area. The Exportadora de Sal has been supporting conservation actions for many years in this region. In regard of the local community, we have provide training for school teachers and community promoters that by their own pass the information and the education for conservation topics to the children at the school level, and from the children to their families. At the same time, we have organized several times a bird festival in the Guerrero Negro town, where birds and their conservation is being promoted with locals and also visitors to the area. Finally, we have offered training to governmental officers in charge of the Biosphere Reserve, the Vizcaíno Biosphere Reserve, in topics like monitoring and basic conservation tools to increase the capacity of the governmental stakeholder operating in the area. This is more or less the kind of a relation that we build in each one of the priority sites for shorebird conservation in Northwest Mexico, with the diverse stakeholders that are found in each area.
Thank you, Gustavo.
Okay, we have one more question for Ashley from Jesus Franco. And Ashley, what was the geographic scope of the human disturbance to migrating shorebirds study? And how can this study can be adapted and implemented in the entirety of the Midcontinent geography? La pregunta es que cuál fue el alcance geográfico de este estudio de disturbio humano para las aves playeras y cómo se puede adaptar e implementar este estudio en la totalidad de la geografía de esta iniciativa.
So our research is focused primarily on the North American component of the Atlantic Flyway. The study of dog walkers and beach walkers was in the US, and the study of land managers was in the US and Canada.
El estudio fue enfocado principalmente en la región del Atlántico, en la parte de Norteamérica, en dos ciudades particulares de Estados Unidos.
I did provide a link in the chat to a paper published in the Condor, where we also cite some research by some of my colleagues in Latin America, where they've studied issues related to dogs as well. There's some differences there because the issue is often about feral dogs, not so much about leashing of dogs.
Thank you, Ashley. Ashley nos va a compartir en la caja de comentarios un documento, un paper, en el cual algunos de sus colegas publicaron la relación entre las amenazas con la presencia de perros ferales en el sitio del estudio.
And the last thing I would say is there's certainly opportunity if human disturbance is a threat as well in the Midcontinental plans to do similar work, whether it be studying what land managers are doing for addressing disturbance, or whether it be to study the people who are the causes of human disturbance. And I'd be happy to continue conversations about that if that is of interest.
I'm sorry, Ashley, could you repeat the first part of your last comment, please?
Yeah, I was saying if human disturbance is also a priority threat in the mid-continent, I think there's opportunity to either study land managers or the people who are the sources of the human disturbance.
Ok, comenta que también hay este tipo de cuestiones en la ruta migratoria del centro del continente, se pudiera generar un estudio y un análisis para ver de qué manera las perturbaciones humanas afectan y que ella estaría dispuesta a apoyar en ese sentido.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. So I think we have time for one more question. Sorry, tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más.
No.
¿Ya no?
No, we don't have.
Ok, ya no tenemos tiempo, entonces pasamos, creo que a partir de ahora, otra vez tenemos la opción de la interpretación simultánea y al parecer Kelly es, Kelly, yo, I think.
Muchas gracias. Cedemos la palabra a Kelly Stone. Thank you, Kelly. Could you continue?
Yeah, I want to thank all of the panelists and our moderators, and we appreciate the questions you are asking our panelists. We have run out of time just because we've got some really good panelists, some really good questions. If you want to connect with our panelists, go ahead, you can email Isadora and I. Our email address will be on the next screen, and we'll connect you with those 4 people who really have done so much for shorebirds. And I think it's a really good example of what we can be doing in the mid-continent once our framework is out. You know, we're hoping to have similar on-the-ground projects. So I want to address your attention to all the names on the screen. These are folks who have been helping us develop this mid-continent all the way from 2 or 3 years ago when we were talking about it in Costa Rica. So these are all the names of people who have put in a lot of work. And this doesn't even include the names of about 125 people who have been on workshops in North America, and then all the dozens of people that are going to be on workshops in South America. So thank you very much to all of these folks. Next slide. So in summary, we are going to wrap up here. We wanted to let you know that we're doing these update webinars about every 3 to 4 months to give you an idea of what we're doing. You can see my email and Isadora's email. We're the coordinators. You can contact us at any time. You can also get in touch with Brad or Rob, or if you're from North America and you recognize those committee members, they are happy to talk with you as well. So you can see these update webinars, we do tape them, or tape is not the right word, they're recorded. You can find them on YouTube and Facebook from the Wizard site, so you can listen to them again, pass them on to other people. We will be, all of the questions that you asked today that we weren't able to address, we'll write up answers to that and have that in a PDF, in a document, and we'll send that to you. Also, one last thing, we have some questions for you. If you're willing, we'd appreciate if you're willing to take just a short survey at the end of this to let us know if these webinars are helping or if they're not helping. So when we, you don't have to do anything. After we end the webinar, there'll just be some questions coming to you from Zoom. Most of them are yes, no. So I just really, on behalf of Isadora and Brad Andres and Rob, Clay, and all of the folks on our North Committee and all of the folks in the South America Committee, really want to thank you for joining today. And I guess keep looking to participate and hear what we're doing in the mid-continent, because the folks that you see here, we're just the ones developing this conservation framework. Where it's going to be really important is when it's finished, and all of you and many, many other people are going to be the ones who are going to have to take that framework, get your piece of it, and start getting it implemented on the ground. So thank you so much. Some good discussion today. Who knows, maybe we need to just have an open discussion for like a whole half hour, just talk shorebirds. So unless Isadora or Rob or Brad have anything, I'll give you guys a minute. If any of you have anything to add, please do. Other than that, from my end, I just want to thank everyone. Looks like we may be done. Okay, thank you. Thank you for attending this second webinar, and we'll see you in about 3 to 4 months for the third one. Thank you so much, Salvador and Carlos.